So we're here today with our second pastor partner match, and this is Pastor Dan from Second Reformed Church and Pastor Bruce, a retired pastor who was willing to be part of the pastor partner program. So thank you both for joining today. And
Thank you.
One of the questions I have for you first is, how has pastor partner made a difference in your church, Second Reformed?
That one's yours.
All right. Well, one way it has made a difference is Bruce brings a wealth of wisdom and experience. I've been pastor for 12 years, and he's been a pastor for much longer than that. So having him...
Thank you for not putting a number on it.
Yes. So part of having him walk in and observe us on Sunday worship, to observe staff meetings, to observe our leadership team meetings, just the wealth of experience. There are things you can learn in books, and then there's things you can learn just through living and going through them yourself through experience. So how has it made a difference is having Bruce's knowledge. It's not his first time to the rodeo where he's seen things, but more specifically, I think just like in any situation, when you're at a certain place for a while, you get accustomed to the mold in the refrigerator or the stains in the carpet or the cracks in the wall, and you don't see them anymore. And specifically, when Bruce came, he was able to point out, why are you doing it this way? Why are you doing it that way? Have you noticed this? Have you noticed that? And then we've worked on restructuring how we meet in terms of boards and committees and things of that nature. So to summarize, bringing his experience in to observe and then ask questions, and specifically he's helping us reorganize how we operate as a church, and that's been a great blessing.
And to put a little context in this, Pastor Dan, you have been a pastor for 12 years, you said, correct?
Yep.
And all of those 12 years, you've been a solo pastor, correct?
Yep.
But Pastor Bruce, how long have you been a pastor, and in what types of churches?
I've been a pastor now for 40 years, and
Thank you for putting a number on it.
yeah, putting a number on it, right. My first church was a very small church, and when I came there, they said 30 families, although I couldn't find them all. And gradually, over a period of time, I was there 4.5 years, and as a solo pastor, was burned out. I was in depression, and thank God a call came, but it came to a fairly large church of about 450 people in Southern California, but I was partnered with someone there. And I spent 6 months healing, and then he left, and but another partner came in, and I spent the next 23 years at that church, and experienced the church growing, and building staff and all that stuff that I knew nothing how to do and had to learn. And then 12 years ago now, I came back to Michigan to serve a church here, which I said I never do, but here I am.
And the church you served here in Michigan was a larger church also, correct?
Yes, it was.
And so in your 3 different churches, the first one was a solo pastor, a solo pastor, and the other 2, you had additional staff partnering with you.
Yes. Yeah. When I first went to California, it was, we were called co-pastors, although he had been there for 7.5 years, and I had a son my age. So it was really, I was not in charge. And then over the years, you get in charge. And when I came here, it was in charge. And that's a different role that was interesting to take on.
So you had a really unique perspective because you had been in Dan's shoes early in your career, and then you got burned out on that as a solo pastor, which is one of the things we're trying to prevent through this pastor partner program. And now you go back and kind of see probably an early self in Dan.
Would have done things much differently, and I can see that now.
So how do you think pastor partner has made a difference in Second Reformed Church?
I think Dan said it very clearly that as we began looking at Second Reformed Church, we looked at back to the year 2000. What are the numbers? And looked simply at membership, worship attendance, baptisms, etc., and found that all the indicators were going down over a period of 5 pastors, and a variety of issues that were being dealt with. But that had put the church, it's on the edge of, are we going to survive? And in order to call that out to people, we did a fairly thorough assessment of the congregation and then met with leadership. And I think what it has done, we're at that point now where we're putting the structure together. We've got a plan and we're putting the structure together to make that plan happen. And I'm hopeful that eventually that's going to be a big benefit to the church. It's not, just knowing the problems and saying, well, we ought to do something about this is one thing, but now we're at the point where people have to say, yes, we're going to do it and we're going to be on board with it. And the jury is still out how that's working.
So you mentioned that you did this graph since 2000, is that correct? So it was about 18 years, and you said through 5 pastors? So this church had 5 pastors, including Dan, or prior to Dan, over the last 18 years?
When I arrived in 2014, they said that there had been 5 pastors in the last 12 years.
Yeah. So,
Wow.
So I'm not sure.
So you came into a church where every 2 to 3 years, they had a different pastor.
There was one who
Average.
was there for 5.5, and then there was a few interims and one that lasted a year or 2.
one unintentional interim.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So clearly then there was a connection between you two in that your experience with strategy and with having the understanding of how bigger churches operate, and Dan, with your situation of always being a solo pastor and never being exposed to that level, you kind of got somebody to open your eyes, or I think, as you said earlier, pull the veil back, right? Tell us a little bit about that analogy.
Yeah. I feel like the type of pastor that I am, or the way the Holy Spirit has formed me, is I'm more the old world pastor, where I'll visit someone who's going through a rough time and sit and pray with them. I enjoy preaching, singing hymns, singing songs, doing marriage counseling and ministering to couples in the midst of funerals and families. But in terms of like strategic organization of a structure, I don't want to just say that wasn't part of my training, because that sounds like an excuse. But there have been times as a solo pastor where I felt like I wish we could hire someone with a master's degree in organizational psychology, where they could figure out systematically how to lead throughout all of this. And Bruce has that experience, so it's kind of exposed my lack of experience, some of my weaknesses, if you will, and it's magnified some of his strengths. So it's allowed me to see, wow, there's all these other aspects of being a pastor that I'm not really good at or informed on. And I think that's one of the hard parts of being a solo pastor, is you're expected to be good at everything and lead the committee structures and oversee the staff meetings and preach every week and do this and do this and do that. And having Bruce come in, where he was a pastor at churches that had much larger staffs, everyone was able to kind of focus on their niche and their giftedness. So having the veil pulled back on what is needed at Second and where I'm lacking has not been, it hasn't been hard, because I need help and the church needs help. So this isn't about me. So I'm thankful for that.
I often compare a business to a church, just because that's my world of experience, is business. And I find it comical that in churches, they expect the pastor to know how to do everything. Yeah. But in business, they don't. You
Right.
have several different people of specialties in different positions within an org chart of a business. And that somehow many people in congregations or leadership teams think that for some reason a pastor can be different than a person who's running a company, and that they expect them to know everything about human resources and marketing and strategic planning and accounting and all the things that you have multiple people at in a business. So
Very true.
what has been the key to you guys working successfully together? What things have you done that made this successful?
There's a passage in scripture that said Jacob wrestled with an angel of the Lord, and afterwards he limped. And at the first time Bruce and I went out for breakfast, I shared about how when I graduated from seminary, I was so confident. I've read the Bible, I have a degree, and just kind of fell flat on my face. And how I now walk with a limp as a pastor. And he shared some of his stories where ministry has been challenging for him and how it's humbled him. And I think immediately we connected through being humbled in the church and also experiencing God's grace in the midst of that. So I don't want to say, I don't have any pride or ego left, but I've been humbled and Bruce has been humbled, and yet we love God and we love the church. So as we met over that breakfast, I saw humility and a teachable and an open heart in him, and those are things I strive for as well. It wasn't like I'm the expert and you don't know anything. It was we're both here to serve the Lord, and Jesus sent the 70 out 2 by 2, and I'm excited to work alongside of you as a team rather than the captain and the servant, or the varsity team and the JV team, or whatever analogy you want to use for that. I just sensed humility and a love for God in him, and I felt like that after that breakfast, I never doubted his motives or character and intentions. It was broken and healed by God's grace. I feel like that's a way to describe both of us.
Awesome. Yeah, and we've been intentional about we meet every Tuesday morning and talk not just about the ministry of second, but talk about life, talk about theology, talk about it's family. As we talk about everything and pray together during those times. That keeps us connected. And there have been times that we've I think very intentional about communicating with each other well, especially, we've had some tough meetings when you're trying to do a turnaround in a church. There are some challenging meetings in that process, and we always sit down afterwards to talk what was happening here and why was it happening, and so the communication part of it's been huge.
That communication and intentional meetings were probably the catalyst for pulling the veil back and seeing those things, and Bruce talking with you, Dan, about, hey, these are some things I'm seeing and these are some things we need to think about doing, and you guys being able to understand each other's strengths and weaknesses also, and where you could kind of fit that puzzle together and say, well, this is really an area that I could help strongly in.
Yeah. And I think too, I don't feel like there's a competition for my job or a competition for who gets the glory. God gets the glory, and we both work for the same boss, and we're both having the same goal of serving the Lord and help strengthen church to share God's love in the community. So I haven't ever felt this power struggle between Bruce and I, and that's been good.
Yeah, and I think as we're talking about that, I think that's a key for the pastor partner, is to realize that my job is to lift him up in the church, not me. And there was an old book years ago that was put out called Leading from the Second Chair. And it's more difficult because I'm used to leading from the first chair. But to realize that, no, this isn't about whether I get the strokes I need. This is about, is the church and our Dan moving forward together well. And, that takes constant communication, but to realize, I can't be somebody who's out for a job, and I certainly am never critical of him in any situation, or nor do I join in that when people suggest it. And those kind of things I think are important toward the success of this.
Those are some great points. I appreciate you saying that, because I feel the same way. Very important. So how has your perspective of pastor partner changed? There was obviously a time when both of you in different situations first heard of or learned about pastor partner, and somebody told you a little bit about it. And now here you are many months into your first match. What couple of things would you say, I think differently about pastor partners than I did when I first heard about it?
I was an immediate yes. So when the pastor who was the first called me and was explaining it, I actually interrupted him, and I was like, no, I'm in. And he kept going through it. I'm like, no, I'm in. I've always wanted this. I've felt the burden of a solo pastor for 11 years before Bruce came, and I've always prayed for and wanted like the wiser, sage mentor, more experienced pastor to work alongside of. So it was an immediate yes. That was my first experience or expectation of it. How has that changed? I think it's changed in the sense of the depth of, like I shared first when Bruce came and maybe pointed out the mold in the fridge or the stains in the carpet or the cracks in the wall. It has exposed how much work needs to be done to make the church healthy, and to be patient with the process. I think we as Americans want a quick fix. I would draw the analogy to someone, coming in with marriage problems. We're not going to solve it in one meeting. So as Bruce is, committed to 1 year, the way the Pastor Partner Project has changed for me is like, whoa, this is not we didn't get here in a day, and we're not going to fix it in a day. So we're making some structural changes. We're addressing them. So yeah, just looking at the 1 year goal, the 3 year goal, the 5 year goal, regardless of how long we are partnered, committing to the long haul. And I didn't have that in mind when I first thought of the Pastor Project. I thought of the immediate things like, oh yes, I don't have to preach every Sunday, or oh yes, I can have these immediate tasks helped with and appeased. But the more in-depth surgery and operation can be overwhelming. That's more how it's changed from the beginning.
So Pastor Partner and partnering with Bruce has really got you to start thinking strategically more long-term, rather than just the, hey, he can help shoulder the load in this year. You're thinking now 2, 3, 4 years out, where before initially you were just thinking, I can get somebody to help me for a year.
Exactly. And that I could go on that for a long time, but that's often how solo pastors are thinking, is I need help putting out this fire and this fire and this fire. It's rare we have the luxury of like, let's look at our 5 year goal. And that I'm open to critique from other pastors for like, how aren't you thinking that? But when you have a week where you have a wedding, a funeral, a baptism, a conflict, a sermon, this and that, I'm not always thinking what's our 5 year plan. I'm more thinking, what do I need to do this week? And for better, for worse, that's how it tends to be. So Bruce coming in has pulled the veil back to help us see things and the process that God has called us to. And now that's going to be more in depth and take more time.
Well, I think your perspective is shared by many solo pastors, that there's not enough time to think beyond the immediate need. And I think it's shared with a lot of leadership teams in churches as well, that it's, hey, if we can just make the budget 1 more year, hey, if we can just keep it low enough, make it 1 more year. It's not really thought about 3 to 5 years, where is this church going?
Right.
So Bruce, how about your perspective?
Well, I would echo that in the sense that I really didn't know what to expect. I was excited about it when I heard about it first. I was considering doing some things in retirement because, I still like working in the kingdom. I still like seeing Jesus doing things in his church. I love his church. And so signing up for it was, my job description is rather vague. Let's put it that way. And, as we've gotten deeper and deeper into the what needs to change for this church to really turn around, my challenge is, how do I make sure this lasts beyond me here? And those are the answers that we've got about 6 months to work out.
So one of my questions was going to be, what are the critical things that you do to make Pastor Partner successful? And what I've heard already a little bit is, one of the first things is discovering what your job description as a pastor partner is, because you kind of have to have those good, honest conversations with each other to say, what is my job description going to be here? Where can my strengths, my abilities help in the greatest way with this church in the situation they're in? And then let's make a job description for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say that's true. I mean, we had a general 4 things that were on my job description that the leadership team had agreed to as they went out to raise funds for it and that sort of thing. And, those 4 things are still on my job description, but, they've gotten some different weights as the 6 months, 7 months we've been together has progressed.
So is there anything else that you would say were critical things, or if you do anything when you match as pastor partners, make sure you do this?
Before I answer that, I just want to revisit that point. Like, in my mind, just like there's like police officers code or doctors code or electricians code, the rule that they follow, one of my pastor codes is when you ask a pastor to preach, you don't tell them what to preach on. You let them go where the Holy Spirit leads them. So I was very resistant. Like I said to Bruce, here are some struggles we're having in a church. I was very resistant to giving him a narrow focus, because with his 40 years experience, I wanted him to come in and just observe, pray, discern, and then, so I would just say for other pastors coming in the program, I would caution, in my opinion, on being too narrow. Like, we're bringing you in to help with our Sunday school programs. Well, maybe after a month they realize actually this is the greatest need. So keep it open for the Holy Spirit to work. But the one thing I would say is just the importance of connecting at the beginning. Bruce is from a different denomination than ours, but they're very close. So we were on the same page right away with doctrine. We connected on personality. And so it would be hard for the Pastor Partner Project if there's the personality clash, the doctrinal clash, all these different things. So I would just say, as soon as you can just kind of get on the same page with some of those things, then empower them to go with God and see. That's more my personality, though. I didn't want to be micromanaging Pastor Bruce, who has all this wisdom and experience, and hovering over him saying, do this and do that. Maybe your personality is different, but I would just say, get on the same page doctrinally, personality-wise, and then go with God.
Interesting, both of our first two matches were of different theology. And so there is some differences in both matches, but the important thing is that you both communicate about the fact that the pastor partner is working for this particular denomination with this theology, and that even if yours might not exactly match that, you're on the same page, and that you support, as you said, Bruce, that solo pastor and that church.
Right. Yeah, and I would say, the question is, what do you make sure of as you're entering into this? Is I would just affirm what Dan said about meeting with each other. I think we met 3 times, and we've talked to other beyond that. Just to say, who are you? Not to say what do you want me to do, but who are you? And those kind of questions went back and forth, and get sharing at a depth that allows us to. Are we going to be joined not just in this harness together, but are we joined in heart together? And yes, our giftedness is different. Our experiences are not exactly the same, and that's a richness to our relationship. And so those weren't things you say, "Oop, not going to do this," because of that. But we explored all those things beforehand.
Okay. So what do you guys see as the end result of the Pastor Partner Project for Second Reformed Church?
We've been going through a strategic planning process of first doing an assessment with a lot of different tools and conversations and congregational questionnaire and all that stuff, and then planning with a master planning team, and now we're in the structure part of it, and then the next one is to make it work. And I guess what I see as the end game is that the church is thriving, and the trend that has been going down now for almost 20 years turns around, and that there is a structure that can support that in a variety of ways. I suspect that that's going to mean some differences, and we've already had some conversations about that with some of the leaders in a staffing structure that right now has its limitations, let's put it that way. And but that we've built a system that can change experience, I guess, at this point.
Okay. Dan?
The end game for me, and I agree with everything Bruce said, is it'll be hard for me to return to being a solo pastor. The Bible teaches 2 are better than 1. When one falls down, the other one can pick them up. When one's cold, the other one can warm them up, and that's a paraphrase. But I think Bruce coming has exposed, revealed, magnified that pastors need to have help. And like part of our restructural organization is saying this isn't all on the solo pastor. We can have different teams and committees doing these things. But just for me personally, on a tough week, or members who are in conflict, or different situations, I'll ask Bruce for help, and he jumps in and helps. So I think the end game for me is saying, wow, I hope we can hire another pastor partner and promote this to my friends who are solo pastors. And it just seems to make the most sense. You have these retired pastors who have all this wisdom and experience, and young pastors who are like treading water in a fast current. We don't have to be in the river alone. So the end game for me is to look to partner again.
And you know, pastor partner, that's one of the things that our goal has always been, is to take a solo pastor church from a solo pastor church to a church that is unstuck, one that can grow, which we know that there's a cap. There's been many books written about there's only so much a solo pastor can do. And unfortunately, the trend is that once they hit that cap, the church starts to decline, their productivity starts to decline, their overall health starts to decline, and it's not a good pattern. We need to reverse that and get those churches unstuck and get the congregation, the leadership team, and the solo pastor aware that not only is there the need for this to happen, but that they can afford it and they can do it and they can move forward. Because oftentimes there is a fear of, we don't want to call a pastor that we don't know if we can afford a year or two from now. And that's one of the great things about pastor partners. It's temporary. It's, hey, Bruce, this is a year, and we'll talk about it again if we want to do another year. But we're not having that long-term commitment. Yes, Dave?
I just wanted to add too, and this calls for solo pastors to give up some control. So just as I lamented about all the burdens of all these things, there is a benefit of that too, because then I can have a say in everything. So with Pastor Bruce coming on, I've had to step back. I've had to let some things go that I liked. So solo pastors who are considering this, I would just say, be willing to give some things up and give them to the lay leaders, to give them to the pastor project for your own benefit. Sometimes we take on the Messiah figure to our own detriment and say, no, I have to be in every decision and I have to be on every committee and I don't want to have to give up control. And Jesus led with the 12, empowered them, sent them off, and had them do things. And Moses, 12 tribes. There's a shared leadership. God's triune. So solo pastors, I would say, don't stop trying to do it all by yourself. Give up some of that control.
It doesn't seem to have been a successful model in many cases.
Right.
Agree.
Well, thank you both very much. I appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.